So the story of Winnie the Pooh, of course, comes from A. Milne, who is an English author. But while the first allusion of it came from the book When We Were Young, which came out in 1924, Winnie the Pooh wasn't actually called Winnie the Pooh in that. He was actually referred to as Edward Bear. So it wasn't until 1926 when you're having a book with the same title of Winnie the Pooh, and this is where Winnie the Pooh was born. So Winnie the Pooh is actually named after A. Milne's son, and this was actually Christopher Robin Milne, and this was one of his toy teddy bears. So teddy bears by this time had become very popularized as a result of President Teddy Roosevelt, because he was big into hunting, and there's a whole story with regard to that. Definitely go and check out our video on that for the main channel. So if you're not subscribed to both channels, definitely do that now. But there's a thing where by this time, teddy bears had become very popular toys for children to have. And also many of the other characters within this, they also were some of the toys which Christopher Robin had. So the name Winnie was named after a famous bear at London Zoo, while Pooh was a friend's pet swan. So that's where the name of Winnie the Pooh ends up being merged together. So Milne ended up developing the characters further, and of course, like we said, they were based on Christopher Robin's toys. And he had the story set in Ashdown Forest in East Sussex from the 500-acre wood, which obviously he ended up changing to being a 100-acre wood to be a bit more magical. So Walt Disney first learned of the story from his daughter Diane, who loved the story so much and laughed so much that he just was absolutely curious, and so he was like, right, I need to make a film about this. So as early as 1938, he had actually made plans that he was going to make a film of this. However, it took so long to get the rights for the film, so obviously he tried in 1938, it wasn't until 1961 that he ended up acquiring the rights for the actual story. And in 1964, this is where he wanted to make a short film of this, but in the end, he ended up deciding that it would just be a featurette within a live action film. So in 1966, this is where you're having the first featurette, and this was Winnie the Pooh and the Honey Tree. Then in 1968, you're having Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day. And then finally in 1974, you're having Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2. And in each of these stories, what Walt Disney's team did is they actually Americanized the characters and actually added a few things in. So for instance, the character of the gopher, he was never actually in any of the originals. And actually they make a joke at one point, saying, oh, well, he's not even in the actual book. And also as well, they added a lot more humor into it. And all of this came under the directorship of Wolfgang Reifferman. So we've covered him in many other videos as well. And actually I may do a completely separate video just focusing on him and his career. So that covers the story of the creative process that went into the making of the film. But now we have to talk about the story of the studio. So in 1977, it was decided that these three featurettes were going to be merged together into one feature-length film. And they were going to have a few filler scenes to basically bridge the stories together and to make it one whole film. So talk about the casting for the story. So the character of Christopher Robin was actually voiced by 3 different voice actors across the 3 different featurettes. So you had Bruce Reifferman, who is also the voice of Mowgli, so he's the son of Wolfgang Reifferman, which we've covered in other videos. But on top of that, you also had John Walmsley, and you had the voice of Timothy Turner, and these 3 together became the voice of Christopher Robin within this film. Next, you're having Sterling Holloway, who is the voice of Winnie the Pooh. And actually, we've covered him at great length throughout this whole series, so definitely go and check out other videos where we speak about him. But this actually was the very last Disney film where he was the voice character for. So, absolute end of the era, really brilliant guy and stuff, right? We really have to give him credit for this, that he did this voice and all the other voices that he did absolutely brilliantly. So it really was the end of an era. Another person that this is the end of the era for was Barbara Luddy, and she is the voice of Kanga in this. So once again, this is also her final Disney film. Next, you had John Fiedler, and he is the voice of Piglet. So we covered him in our last video where we spoke about Robin Hood. Next, you have Ralph Wright, and he is the voice of Eeyore. So he was actually just a writer in several different Disney films. So this actually one of the first roles where he was actually the voice actor for. Next, you had Clint Howard, who's the voice of Roo. So we covered him more in our video about the Jungle Book, but also to let you know that he was in The Grinch That Stole Christmas. Next, you have Paul Winchler, who's the voice of Tigger, but also, of course, he appears in Aristocats as well, as we said. And then also you had Julius Matthews, who appears in 101 Dalmatians, but more famously, he is the voice of Archimedes in The Sword and the Stone, and in this, he is the voice of Rabbit. Next, you have Hal Smith, who's the voice of Owl, and he appears as quite a minor character within the Jungle Book. And you also had Howard Morris, who is the voice of the Gopher. And then finally, we have to talk about a director who I said at the beginning was Bagheera. Yes, that is the voice of Sebastian Coburn. So he appears in The Sword and Stone, and of course he appears in the Jungle Book. So that covers the story of the studio, but now we have to talk about the themes and the history. So in terms of the themes for this, we've already kind of covered with regard to Teddy Roosevelt and obviously the influence that had on children's toys at the turn of the last century. But also we have to say something which is in regard to the different characters. And actually a book which was absolutely life-changing for me was The Tao of Pooh. So this came out in 1982 and this was written by Benjamin Hoff. But within this story, it's basically kind of saying that in terms of Taoism, which is obviously, yin and yang, it's also about like balance and stuff, right? It's basically saying that the way we ought to live our life isn't to be like Piglet, where we're all anxious all the time, isn't to be like Tigger, where we just bounce around all the time, isn't to be like Rabbit or like Owl, where we're just too smart, or like think that we're too smart rather, and actually end up making a whole lot of mistakes and are very prideful and arrogant. Instead, we ought to be more like Winnie the Pooh, where we go through life and things just work out. If it's raining today, we'll figure it out. If it's sunny today, we'll figure it out. How are we going to get our next meal? We'll figure it out. How are we going to get out of the mist? We'll figure it out. So in life, before, when I read this book when I was like 22, 23, right, I used to be very kind of worried about things. I used to be very focused on, oh, this and that, etc. And then having this book here, right, reading this book was really life-changing for me because it made me realize basically you have to find the path of least resistance. Just like the river, if you come across a rock, go over the rock, go around the rock, don't try and go through the rock. So that's something which was very, very influential, and deep within the psychology of Winnie the Pooh, that's kind of a message to have here, which is actually be like Pooh Bear, right? He's the hero of the story. Be chilled out like him. Don't worry about things. Don't think you're too clever. Don't, and also, of course, don't be like Eeyore, where you're just miserable, depressed, and pessimistic all the time. Just be a happy optimist, right? And actually, that's why my tattoo, the only tattoo that I have and that I'm likely to get, is yin and yang, and that's as the influence of me reading that book. So just a little bit trivial with regard to that. So that covers the themes and the history, and now we have to talk about the legacy of the film. So what's annoying about this one is that